I thought my wife's food stealing was just pregnancy cravings. Then she started swapping our plates when I wasn't looking. My wife is 7 months pregnant, and I understand that being pregnant is not easy. You are growing a whole human being inside you, and naturally you are going to have to eat more, but my wife won't stop eating my food. At first, I let it slide because I was trying to be understanding, but it just didn't stop. Most times, after coming back from work and looking forward to eating my only meal of the day, she will casually start eating off my plate while I'm eating. This is after she has eaten her own meal earlier. When we eat at the same time, she basically will do a back and forth between our plates. Last night was the final straw. I had a long day at work and was very hungry. When we started eating, she reached for my plate to grab something before even touching her food first, and I pushed her hands away and told her to stop eating my ducking food and that I'm really tired of not being able to eat my food in peace while she gets to. She started crying and told me that I could try and understand that it's because she is pregnant, that she gets really hungry and can't help it instead of being an ass about it. Update 1. I didn't expect so many people to relate to or even care about this situation. Some of you have been super supportive while others have been pretty harsh, but either way, thanks for the feedback. A lot has happened since I posted, so here's an update on how things are going. First, I'll admit that I wasn't prepared for how much pregnancy would affect my wife in so many different ways. When I wrote the original post, I was just so frustrated. I mean, I get that pregnancy cravings are a real thing and that they can make you want to eat random things, but it honestly felt like she was eating my food just to mess with me at that point. I didn't realize how much stress she was under and how that was tied into her eating habits. I'm not trying to make excuses for myself, but it's hard to understand all of this when you're in the middle of it and just trying to get through the day. After I posted, I decided to really take a step back and think about what was happening. A few people pointed out that it might not just be hunger, but maybe a kind of comfort thing for her. That made me think. Maybe the whole eating from my plate wasn't just about food, but something deeper going on. So I sat down with her to talk, not while we were eating this time, because obviously things got heated whenever food was involved. We had a more peaceful conversation this way. I asked her why she always ate off my plate when she had her own food and why it seemed like she couldn't help herself. She got a little defensive at first, probably because I've been a bit of a jerk about it. But when I reassured her that I wasn't trying to pick a fight and I just wanted to understand, she opened up. Turns out, she didn't really think about it too much. She said that when she grabs food from my plate, she feels a sense of closeness, like we're sharing something. It's not just that she's hungry, it's like this weird subconscious thing where she wants to feel connected to me. I had never thought about it like that before, and it kind of hit me. Here I was thinking she was being inconsiderate when really, she was just trying to feel close to me in a way that was comforting to her. She mentioned how pregnancy has been really isolating for her, like she's in this bubble of discomfort and fatigue, and eating from my plate, though it probably sounds weird, was a way for her to feel less alone in that moment. I started to feel like an even bigger jerk at this point, because I never realized how lonely she was feeling, even though we live in the same house and see each other every day. I didn't understand that she was feeling disconnected because she's going through this huge, life-changing experience physically and mentally, and I wasn't really there for her in the way that I should have been. After that conversation, I apologized for snapping at her. I explained that it was hard for me to deal with too because I come home from a long day of work and I just want to eat in peace. I admitted that I wasn't really considering what she was going through and that I'd try to be more understanding. At the same time, I asked her if we could find some sort of compromise. I didn't want to feel like I was fighting for my food every time we sat down to eat, and she understood that. So we came up with a plan. I suggested that maybe we make a little extra food when we cook, so that if she's still hungry or wants to eat something from my plate, there's more to go around. She thought that was a good idea. We also agreed that if she wants to take food from my plate, she could just ask first. That way it doesn't feel like I'm getting blindsided every time, and I don't get as frustrated. I've been trying to be more mindful too. Like, when I see her reaching for my food now, instead of getting annoyed, I just offer her some. I'll admit it's not easy because after a long day, my patience is already pretty thin. But I'm working on it. I can see that it makes her happy when I share, and knowing that it's more about emotional connection than hunger makes it a little easier for me to let go of the annoyance. That being said, it's not all smooth sailing. There are still times when she reaches over without asking, and I have to remind myself not to snap. But now that I understand where she's coming from, I'm trying to react differently. I just hand her a bite and smile, even if I'm a little annoyed inside. It's a work in progress for both of us. The funny thing is, ever since we had that conversation, the whole food stealing thing has actually gotten a lot better. Maybe because she feels more understood, or because I'm not getting upset as often. We still have moments where she'll reach for my plate, and I'll playfully say, "Hey, remember our deal?" And she'll laugh and pull her hand back. It's become this kind of inside joke now, which has taken a lot of the tension out of it. I'm not saying that I've figured everything out, because there are still a lot of things about pregnancy and relationships in general that I'm learning. But I do feel like we're in a better place now. It's all about understanding each other's needs and finding ways to meet in the middle, even when those needs seem completely different. To anyone else going through something similar, I'd say communication is key. I was holding in so much frustration that it eventually came out in a pretty nasty way, and that didn't help anyone. Once we actually talked about it, we were able to come up with a solution that worked for both of us. It wasn't easy to have that conversation, but it made things better in the long run. I'll keep you guys updated if anything else changes, but for now, things are looking up. I'm trying to be more understanding of her cravings and needs, and she's being more mindful of my boundaries. We're both learning, and I guess that's all you can really do in situations like this. Thanks again for the advice and support, and for those of you who said I was the asshole, you might have been right, but I'm working on it. Update 2. Hey everyone, it's been a little while since my last update, and I've got to say, things have taken an unexpected turn. I wasn't planning on posting again, but a lot has happened since my wife and I had that heart-to-heart about the food situation. Some of it is good, some of it is, well, let's just say things got weird. So, after our initial talk, everything was going pretty smoothly. Like I mentioned before, we worked out a system where we'd just make a bit more food or she'd ask before reaching over, and it helped a lot. She was in a better mood, I was less stressed, and overall the whole "she's eating my food" thing had toned down a lot. But then, as her pregnancy progressed, things started to shift in ways I didn't expect. At first I thought maybe it was just her cravings getting stronger, but it started to go beyond that. There were a couple of days when she'd ask me to pick up very specific foods on my way home from work, things she had never even liked before. I remember one day she texted me asking for jalapeno stuffed olives and chocolate chip cookies, which seemed like a weird combination. But hey, I figured cravings are cravings. When I brought them home, she barely even ate any of it. Instead, she started asking if I could try them first. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed she just wanted to see if it was something she might like, but it became this new habit. She'd have me taste test all her weird cravings, and then she wouldn't even touch the food afterward. It was kind of funny at first, but it started getting old pretty quickly. Every meal we had together, she'd want me to try a bite of her food first, and then she'd decide if she wanted it based on my reaction. This was happening more often, and I started feeling like I was her personal food tester or something. One night, I joked about it, saying, "I feel like I should be getting paid for all this taste testing," and she didn't laugh. She just stared at me for a second and then mumbled something about making sure it's safe. I asked her what she meant by that, and she brushed it off, saying she was just joking. I didn't really know how to take that, but I let it go. Things escalated from there, though. A few days later, I noticed that when I'd get up to go to the bathroom or step out of the room for a second, she'd switch our plates. I didn't even realize it at first because she's sneaky about it. I'd come back, start eating, and halfway through the meal, I'd notice something was off. Like, I'd be eating pasta, and suddenly there'd be way more cheese than I remember putting on my plate. Or she'd make us both sandwiches, and I'd realize mine was cut differently than how I do it. The first time I noticed, I thought I was just tired or imagining things, but it kept happening. Every time I'd leave the room, even for just a minute, we'd end up with swapped plates. At this point, I was more confused than anything. I confronted her about it one evening, asking if she was switching our food on purpose. She got defensive, telling me I was being paranoid and that I was imagining things. But I knew I wasn't. I mean, there was no way I was imagining my plate being completely different from how I left it. The next morning, I decided to test it out. I made breakfast for both of us, scrambled eggs and toast. I purposely put way too much salt on my eggs because I hate overly salty food, but I figured if she switched our plates, it would be obvious. Sure enough, as soon as I got up to grab some juice from the fridge, I came back, and the overly salty eggs were sitting on her side of the table. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her while she ate the eggs without a single complaint, even though I know for a fact she hates salty food even more than I do. That's when I asked her straight up, "Why do you keep switching our plates?" She got quiet for a second, and then she said something that caught me completely off guard. She told me that during the pregnancy, she'd developed this anxiety about food, and she was worried that something might be wrong with what she was eating, so she wanted me to taste everything first to make sure it was safe. When I asked her what she meant by safe, she couldn't really explain. She just said it was a feeling she had, like a gut instinct, that she couldn't shake. She admitted that it didn't really make sense, but that it made her feel better if I ate from her plate first, or if she ate my food after I'd started eating it. I didn't know how to respond. On the one hand, I understand that pregnancy can mess with your mind in all kinds of ways, but this was starting to feel like more than just cravings or weird habits. I told her I was worried that this might be a sign of something deeper going on, maybe some kind of anxiety or obsessive-compulsive thing developing because of the pregnancy hormones. I suggested that we talk to her doctor about it, but she shut that down immediately. She got really upset and said I was making her feel crazy when she just wanted to make sure everything was okay for the baby. I didn't want to push her too hard, so I dropped it for the time being. But honestly, I'm kind of at a loss here. Things have gotten even stranger since that conversation. Now she doesn't just switch our plates when I leave the room, she'll watch me start eating, and then halfway through the meal, she'll swap them without saying anything. She waits until I've already taken a few bites, like she's waiting to make sure nothing happens to me before she'll eat her food. I don't know what to do anymore. It's stressing me out, and I'm worried about her. I've tried to be understanding and supportive throughout this whole pregnancy, but this has gone beyond just normal pregnancy quirks. It feels like she's spiraling into some kind of paranoia about food, and I don't know how to help her. I guess my question now is, has anyone else dealt with something like this during pregnancy? Is this something I should push harder on and try to get her to see a professional about? Or is it just another weird pregnancy thing that'll pass once the baby is born? I love my wife, and I want to be there for her, but I'm really concerned about where this is heading. Any advice or similar experiences would be appreciated. Update 3. I wasn't planning on coming back with another update, but after everything that's happened, I felt like I owed it to you all, especially to those who've been following this roller coaster of a situation. Honestly, I'm still processing everything, and I don't think I ever could have predicted how this was going to turn out. It's been a wild few weeks, to say the least. So, where do I even start? After the last update, things really started to escalate. My wife's behavior around food got even more bizarre, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I tried to keep things light at first, sticking to our usual routine of cooking together and making jokes about her taste-testing obsession, but it wasn't working. The plate swapping was happening constantly, and there was no humor in it anymore. It was like she was genuinely afraid to eat, unless I had taken a bite first. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring this, so I sat her down again and gently suggested that maybe we should see a therapist or at least talk to her doctor about these new anxieties. I told her I loved her and that I just wanted to make sure she was okay, not only for herself, but for the baby too. Well, that didn't go over well. She got really defensive again and told me I was overreacting, that it was just pregnancy hormones making her feel weird and that it would all pass once the baby was born. She kept saying that I was making her feel crazy for something she couldn't control, and it turned into a pretty big argument. I didn't want to push her too hard, but I was genuinely scared for her at this point. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called her OB/GYN and explained what was going on, not behind her back, of course. I told her I was going to call because I was worried, and surprisingly, she didn't fight me on it this time. I think deep down she knew something wasn't right, but she didn't want to admit it out loud. Anyway, her doctor said that while pregnancy can definitely cause anxiety and strange behaviors, the level of paranoia she was showing about food was unusual, especially this late in the pregnancy. She recommended we come in for an appointment right away, which we did the next day. At the appointment, the doctor talked to us for a while, asking about the anxiety, the food swapping, and how my wife had been feeling mentally and physically. I could tell my wife was uncomfortable the whole time, but to my surprise, she opened up more than I thought she would. She admitted that she was scared of something happening to the baby, scared that something would go wrong if she didn't do things a certain way. She said that eating from my plate made her feel like she was keeping herself and the baby safe, because if I was okay, then the food must be okay too. The doctor listened carefully and then suggested something that I hadn't even considered. She said it sounded like my wife was experiencing prenatal anxiety, which can sometimes manifest in obsessive-compulsive behaviors, especially when the mother is fixated on protecting the baby. It's not super common, but it's also not unheard of, and in my wife's case, the anxiety had clearly latched onto food as a way to cope with her fears. The doctor reassured us that with the right support, we could manage this, but it was important that we address it now, before it got worse. We were referred to a perinatal therapist who specializes in mental health during pregnancy, and honestly, that's when things really started to change. My wife was hesitant at first, but after a couple of sessions, she admitted that it was helping her. The therapist helped her work through some of the fears she was having, and they started focusing on different coping mechanisms to manage her anxiety. It wasn't an overnight fix, but it was a huge step in the right direction. As the weeks went on, I noticed a significant shift in her behavior. She still had moments where she'd reach for my plate out of habit, but she started catching herself before actually taking food. Sometimes she'd laugh it off and say, "Oops, old habits die hard." But I could tell she was making an effort to change. She even apologized for how intense things had gotten, and she admitted that she hadn't realized how much anxiety she was carrying around until we started talking to the therapist. One thing that really stood out was when she said, "I didn't realize how much I was trying to control everything because I felt so out of control." That hit me hard. I mean, she's been going through this massive physical and emotional transformation with the pregnancy, and here I was, just focusing on the surface stuff, like her eating my food, without really understanding what was going on underneath. I think that was a big wake-up call for both of us. The good news is that the therapy and the doctor's support really helped. My wife has been doing so much better since we got her some help. The food issues have almost completely stopped, and she's no longer obsessively swapping plates or insisting that I eat first. We still joke about it sometimes because humor helps us cope, but the paranoia isn't there anymore, and we can both sit down to a meal without all that tension hanging over us. The best part? We're now just a few weeks away from the baby's due date, and things are feeling a lot more stable. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect, because let's be real, pregnancy and preparing for a new baby is stressful as hell, but we're in a much better place than we were a couple of months ago. My wife seems more at ease, and I feel like I'm finally being the supportive partner she needs during all of this. Looking back, I can't believe how much I underestimated the impact of pregnancy on mental health. I thought I was being patient and understanding, but I was missing the bigger picture entirely. I was so focused on the surface-level frustration of her eating my food that I didn't see how deeply rooted her anxiety was. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that communication and empathy are everything. Sometimes the weirdest, most frustrating behaviors have deeper reasons behind them, and it takes a little digging to figure out what's really going on. Anyway, I just wanted to thank everyone who gave me advice and shared their own experiences. I'm not saying I handled everything perfectly, far from it, but the support from this community really helped me get some perspective and take action when things started to spiral. For anyone going through something similar, don't be afraid to reach out for help, whether that's from a doctor, a therapist, or even just your partner. You don't have to handle everything on your own. I guess this is it for now. I'll probably be too busy with a newborn to post again anytime soon, but I wanted to close the loop on this saga. Thanks again, and wish us luck with the baby.